Okay, so we're going to talk about powers of I, and you kind of have to remember your rules of exponents with this. So just bear with me with this. So I put your rules of exponents here, which is basically say that if I have x to the a and x to the b, I'd add my exponents. So if I have I to the second and I to the third, that's going to be I to the 2 plus 3, which is 5, if you remember. The other thing I want you to remember is if I have x to the a to the b power, when you have a power to a power, you'd multiply your exponents. So in this case, I worked a little bit backwards. So I to the 6, well, that's the same thing as I to the second to the third power. Okay, and that'll come into play. So the only thing you really have to remember with these is I squared is equal to -1. So when I say I to the first power, well, that's just going to be plain old I. I to the second power, well, by definition, is -1. I to the third power is a little bit different, and we're actually going to be working with these two things here. These are actually the only two things that you really need to know with this. So I to the third power, well, I'm going to break this down into something that I know. I know that that's the same thing as I to the second power times I to the first power. Okay, I to the second times I to the first, because 2 plus 1 is, so this 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. I know I to the second is -1, so I'm going to say this is the same thing as -1 times I, which is just -1I. I have I to the fourth power. Okay, that's the same thing as I to the second times 2, which is the same thing as I squared to the second power. And that's what I was going over with our rules of exponents right here. And I'm going to go back over them. Well, I know I squared is equal to -1, so I'm going to replace my I squared with -1. -1 squared is 1. We're going to keep going from there. I to the fifth power. Well, that's the same thing. I want an even power, and because I know what I squared is, that's going to be the same thing as I to the fourth power times I to the first power. I know I to the fourth power is I to the 2 times 2, which is the same thing. And then we still have our I here, sorry. It's the same thing as I squared to the second power, sorry, times our I, can't forget our I right here, which is the same thing as -1 squared times I, which is just plain is 1I, or just plain I. We're going to do to the sixth power. So I to the sixth, when I have an even power, I'm going to be looking at that. So I to the sixth power is the same thing as I squared to the third power, because 2 times 3 is 6. Let me just back up just for a second. So I to the sixth is the same thing as I squared times 3. And I can just rewrite that. That's going to be I squared to the third power. I squared is -1. And -1 to the third power is -1. Now, one thing you need to make sure you're very careful of is if you're putting these in Desmos, your -1s, that you put parentheses. Make sure you put parentheses around this, or otherwise you're going to get the wrong answer. I to the seventh. Well, I know that I squared is equal to -1. So I want to break it down, and I want to make sure that the number that the power that I have is going to be an even. So this is going to be I to the sixth times I to the first. Okay, well, I to the sixth is the same thing as I squared times 3, which is the same thing as I squared to the third power, which is the same thing as -1 to the third power times I. -1 to the third power is -1I, or -I. Okay, I to the eighth. Okay, this is nice even power. So I want to get this to powers of 2, because I know what I squared is. So I make this I to the 2 times 4, which is the same thing as I squared to the fourth power. I know I squared is -1, so that's going to be -1 to the fourth power, which is just plain old 1. And I'm supplementing this with other videos. Some of them work on the concept of 4I to the fourth power being 1. don't have to worry about that too much. So what you essentially, all you have to do with these is you have to find these in terms of I squared. So right here, well, this I to the 12th, well, 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay, so this is going to be I to the 2 times 6 power, which is the same thing as I squared to the 6 power, which is negative 1 to the 6 power, which is just 1. And so your answer is 1 here. I to the 15th. Whenever it's odd, I rewrite it. That's going to be I to the 14th times I. I take my 14 and I divide by 2, okay, because it tells me how many I squareds I have. So I to the 14th is the same thing as I squared to the 7th times I, which is negative 1 to the 7th power, times I, which is negative 1I, or negative I. 65th power, so we have an odd power again, okay? That's going to be the same thing as I to the 64th times I to the 1st, or just I. I take 64, I divide by 2. That tells me how many I squareds. I have 32. So that's going to be I squared to the 32nd power times I. I squared is negative 1. And negative 1 to the 32nd power is just 1. And so my answer is 1I or I. Either of those are fine. 402 power, well, it's even. All I do is I do 402 divided by 2, which is 201. So this is going to be I squared to the 201st power, which is negative 1 to the 201st power, which is just plain old negative 1. Okay, so that's it. You just figure out if it's odd, you know it's going to have an I in it, so you just take away an I, divide by 2, put negative 1 to that power. Okay, so here are some little bit of dicier problems. This first one, the only trip here is that there's a negative 1 here. So this is negative 1 times I to the 11th, okay? And I just remember that I have a negative 1 in my answer down here somewhere. I still do the same thing. I look at my negative, at the 1 to the 11th. So I to the 11th is I to the 10th times I to the 1st, okay? I take my 10, divide by 2, that's going to be 5. So I know it's going to be I squared to the 5th power times I, which is negative 1 to the, sorry about that, negative 1 to the 5th power times I. Okay, negative 1 to the 5th power is negative 1. So this negative 1 here is from my original part of my problem. And then there is my I. That's that negative 1. And so it's just going to be 1I or I. And those are your answers. Okay. When you have a negative in the exponent, what you do to make that positive is you put it in the denominator. So I'm going to take, this is going to be I to the positive 100 power. Okay, and then all I do is I simplify this. So I know 100 divided by 2 is 50. So when I rewrite this, this is going to be 1 over I squared to the 50th power, which is going to be negative 1 to the 50th power, which is going to be 1 over 1, which is just 1. That's my final answer. All right, 3 and 4, just a little bit more challenging. I multiply by numbers, I multiply by I, so that's going to be 4 times 7 times I, which is 28 times I squared. Anytime I see I squared, I know that's negative 1, so this is going to be 28 times negative 1, which is negative 28. That's my answer. This one here, do the same thing, multiply by numbers, negative 4 times 2 times negative 9 times I times I times I. So negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 9 is positive 72. That's an I squared times an I. 72, I know I squared is -1. -72I. And that